This is Dementia Empowered, the podcast helping family caregivers navigate dementia care, overcome legal and financial challenges, and make confident decisions to support their loved ones. I'm your host, Patrick Collie. Let's get started. You may have the legal authority to make medical decisions for a person living with dementia. Treatment may prolong the days of that person's life, but how much thought have you given to whether that is truly your goal? Keep listening, and you will hear how your paperwork, the healthcare power of attorney, advance directive, various medical orders are tools in the toolbox, but there must be more to the plan. Second, how your family member living with dementia can be assessed medically before there's an emergency so that you might know likely medical decisions that you will have to make. And third, conversations about what quality of life really means for your person living with dementia are so important. Conversations are where the plan emerges from the paperwork. My guest today is Dr. Brittney Lamb, whose extensive experience as an emergency room physician finds her treating older adults all the time. Dr. Lamb sees how family members are called on to make critically important medical decisions, but they are often caught unprepared for those decisions. You might think of a trip to the emergency room as an unpredictable random occurrence, but Dr. Brittney Lamb considers it highly foreseeable, something that you can and should plan for. I highly recommend as a resource to dementia caregivers Brittney's website, blambmd.com. That's blambmd.com. You can add a /email and get signed up for her regular emails. She holds question and answer calls. It's really just a fantastic resource for the medical decision making that is going to be part of your caregiving. Dr. Brittney Lamb, thank you for joining me on Dementia Empowered.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Patrick. I appreciate it.
I follow your excellent work, and I've heard you say paperwork is not a plan. Talk to me about that, because you do paperwork and I do paperwork as an elder law attorney. So tell me how that's not a plan.
Yeah, and I feel bad telling people this because we do really, inside the healthcare system, we tell people you need to have a medical power of attorney, you need to name a healthcare decision maker, you need to have advanced directives. But in real time practice, it is very challenging, especially with dementia, to use advanced care planning documents like advanced directives for real time decisions in the emergency department. They usually focus on end of life decision making and end stage decision making, and people live for a long time with the different diseases that cause dementia. So I think they're tools, but they're not a plan. And there's a lot more that people can become prepared for.
I think they're sufficient, just not necessary. And so, what do I mean by this? Maybe a bit of background on the legal part of this for the
Yeah.
listeners. The healthcare power of attorney, medical power of attorney, you're naming someone who will be speaking to Dr. Brittney Lamb on your behalf. But the living will is the second half of it. It's what does that person say on your behalf? But in every state I'm aware of, the law says the living will does not come into effect until you have what is called an end stage medical condition, meaning the doctors have tried everything, but there's something that cannot be fixed. You have a limited amount of time left. And so now some quality of life choices are being made. But I think, Brittney, your point is there's a whole lot of medical decision making well before there's an unfixable problem.
Yeah, it's the living will. The living will is so focused on end of life. As a physician, it helps me. It helps me in one way, basically. If someone's actively dying in my ER, or I think their death is pretty imminent, and I can read their document and it says that they don't want life prolonging care in a situation like that. If they're clearly at the end stages of a condition, I can use their advanced directive. The other time that it's medically helpful is inside of the hospital when someone's already in the ICU receiving maximal medical management and it's not working and they're not getting better. And so you can use the advanced directive in that way. That is like the way that they're typically written, like what you're saying with like the state templated language. So what I find in real life is that people tell me, "Oh, we've got it all covered. We've done all that work. We've talked to an attorney." And I'm thinking to myself, as an attorney, a medical decision making expert and doctor, no, that's tough for the attorney. I'm glad that you feel so confident. But then I ask them to give me the paperwork and I'm like, yeah, this doesn't help me. I'm like, I need to talk to you. and then they haven't had conversations. So, but I do think that if we're going to put emphasis on one of these documents more than the other, the intention of one, it certainly is can be very helpful to name who you would want to make your medical decisions, but you got to talk to them too. You can't
That
just
yeah,
name
right.
them.
That's pretty
Yeah.
fundamental because the law, this is everything in life is it has some law saying how it should work just to avoid abuses or neglect. And the law in all 50 states says you can name the person who will be your spokesperson. That's the healthcare power of attorney. You are naming someone to speak for you because if you don't, and there's a plenty of people walking around out there with no estate planning, then the law just goes through your family tree and says this
Yeah.
whole class of people, even the one who's estranged from the family, can make your medical decision. So there is some sense in naming someone. And I'm sure every hospital administrator shudders at the idea that these go unlooked at because the doctor who has to make some quick decisions sees family members getting along just fine and says, "What do you want to do?" And I know
Yeah.
that's probably how it works most of the time. But if there's any disagreement,
Yeah.
if the hospital's worried about getting sued, they're going to go by the law, and you want to name the person who has the emotional wherewithal to keep their head, to think about what you would have said as the patient, not what they want, and
Yes.
make the decision. But to your point, what does the person know about what the patient wants without conversations? And maybe you
Mhm.
can give me some examples of where the person might not be actively dying. There's not end stage cancer. The person has dementia, maybe in the middle stages of dementia. And
Mhm.
it's a question of, do we offer this medication? Do we offer this treatment? But the answers might be no, even though they're
Mhm.
not anywhere near death. Give me some examples of that.
Oh my gosh, I could talk about this for a long time. So, in the emergency department, one of the most common things is when a person has a change in mental status. So, they're acting differently than their baseline, and we can't always figure it out. And so, sometimes we'll offer hospital admission for more testing based on the person's individualized risk factors. Another thing is when people fall and we can't rule out that they had a syncopal episode or passed out, and now they're aging person and maybe they had a cardiac event or something that we could monitor, and so we'll offer admission to the hospital. How are we going to treat a severe infection? How are we going to treat sepsis? Depending on a person's goal of care and how aggressive we should be. And there are different layers to that treatment. And you might consider, like, okay, well, let's do everything that we can now that what might be considered life prolonging. But if that's not working or things are getting worse, then we're not going to keep progressing that like life prolonging care. People should know about that. The other things are like what the person's specific medical problems are. So atrial fibrillation, being on blood thinners, having heart failure, COPD, chronic kidney disease, like these things all have a typical progression. And there are reasons why people come into the hospital system. And so at certain points, you may not want to be as aggressive and you may want to draw the line in what's okay and what's not okay with those types of situations. Outside of the hospital, people struggle with whether or not we should keep looking for cancer. Should we do colonoscopies? They struggle with, should we do pacemakers? Should we do TAVRs, which are like intravascular replacements of the aortic valve? There's a lot of cardiac care advancements where we could keep prolonging someone's life and we could protect their quality of life. But should we do that? And what does the recovery of these things look like? So there's a ton of stuff that people, it's not about end of life. Like when you're making medical decisions for a person living with dementia, it is super, super important if you want to feel good about what you're doing and be able to trust your instincts and trust your gut to become informed about the most likely decisions that you'll have to make. And that is possible. Although our healthcare system is very frustrating. And that's why I came online is to help people with this, because I think that the time constraints make this challenging to do in real world interactions.
Yeah, I'm sure your list that you just rattled off in quick succession could just go on and on. And
Yeah.
just based on stories of families I've been working with in the last couple of months, there was a family where the diagnosis of dementia was made, and the geriatrician looked at the list of medications and said, "Do we really want to keep this person on a statin? Do we care if there's a stroke that ends his life? Because that might be more conducive to quality of life than where the dementia will be going." And that's jarring for a family to hear. But
Mhm.
another family, since you mentioned sepsis, a woman who has type 2 diabetes, which means that if she has a wound, it's not going to heal all that well. And what happens when wounds do not heal? Infection gets in. Well, she had sepsis twice And that would
Mhm.
have ended her very late stage dementia, where her quality of life is completely gone. She is not the person living the life that she probably would have envisioned if she could call the shots.
Mhm.
But because her pulse, the medical order, she had spoken to a doctor at some point and said, "Yes, I want antibiotics." They keep administering antibiotics and saving her
Mm.
when she has sepsis. So I'm glad you're
Oh, I
talking
have
about.
things to say about that.
Okay, go ahead. Run with
Well,
it.
so okay, so just so people know, PULSE is a medical order form, and you can fill out your own medical order form with your doctor when you have capacity to make medical decisions. But people should also know that the medical decision maker can also do a PULSE form with the doctor. And so, in a situation like that, I would say, I think we should reevaluate what this person would say about their current quality of life. And so, if we would say that now that she's been through this twice and she's not doing as well, like, would she change her mind about these antibiotics? And so, one decision that we really don't overturn when patients make for themselves is whether or not they would want to have CPR. Like, what if they would not want to have CPR? If they would not want to have CPR, we do not overturn that decision. But a decision about antibiotics, it's like, I also, as a physician, I'm like, were they informed? And now would they change their mind based on what's been happening to them? Like, we have to consider the fact that when we make our own medical decisions, we consider what's happened to us, what's currently happening to us, and what might happen to us when we make a decision. And that's what, as a decision maker, we should speak on behalf of the person as if they were able to take in that information and make their own choice. So I think that there's an opportunity there to potentially update that pulse form as a medical decision maker and say, wait a minute, um, are we doing the right thing here?
Exactly right. And that's really the gist of the conversation I had with that woman's adult children, one of whom is a nurse and got it immediately and said, "Well, if you are the designated healthcare agent in the healthcare power of attorney, you are speaking for your mother and you sit down with the physician and discuss, does this still make sense?" And
Yeah.
so that was the next conversation to have after they were in my office, just but really along the lines of what you're saying. Just what would mom want? And would she have changed that form if she could speak for herself? But a lot of this comes down to anticipation of likely medical incidents. And so the second point I wanted to make here is you believe that it not only think about them in your own mind, but your physician can identify some
Yeah.
likely medical risks, some decisions you're going to have to make as the caregiver.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would do if I was a primary care doctor. Now, granted, I'm not, so I don't operate within their time constraints. But, yes, physicians can tell you what medical problems am I at risk for just because I'm aging? What medical problems am I at risk for because of the medical problems I already have? And what are the issues that happen to people living with dementia? The specialist can do that as well. So a lot of people are seeing specialists, and you can say, hey, what are the hospital based things? Like, what would make my person need to go to the hospital? And I want to think about the medical decisions I might have to make in the hospital. And I do focus on that a lot because that's where I work. But I also, it's time sensitive. We're making stressful decisions, like we need to make them fast. And if you can think about them ahead of time and become educated about the treatment options, then you can think about what's okay, what's not okay now, and then how that would change in the future. So yeah, I think just simply asking them for a list is like the first thing I would do is like, give me all the things you think could happen to my person that would make them need to go to the ER or the hospital, and then working to become informed about like how those things are managed. And you can have more conversations with them about that. You can ask for an advanced care planning session that's covered by Medicare. You can also ask for palliative care for a person living with dementia. That can help with those types of conversations. Really establishing the goal of care is super, super important in order to help you understand what treatment options are okay and not okay. So you can also come and I can help you.
Yeah,
That's what I
exactly,
do.
at blammd.com, and because I signed up for the emails at blammd.com, I saw recently how you were writing about how that primary care physician who has time constraints that you referred to just now,
Mm.
because they work for, let's say, a university-owned hospital system, and they're held by the number crunchers to don't spend this much time with a patient. They're human
Mhm.
beings, and they have family members and they will
Mhm.
respond to courteous requests for a little bit of guidance, because then
Yeah.
that leads us into how conversations are so important. You have to know the information so that you can be empowered enough to start discussing with your other family members, with maybe with the person living with dementia, but you're having conversations and it's really determining what is quality of life. What does that mean for this particular person? So, to talk about that, what should people be talking about in the conversations?
Yeah, so it's a big thing. And I think there's two groups of people. There are those who are a person living with dementia has recently been diagnosed or in their early stages, and you can have conversations with them directly about what does living well mean to you? Like, what's a good day for you? What are your concerns about being in the healthcare system? Like, what do you know about how your body can be impacted by living with dementia? Like, getting an idea about what they're nervous about, worried about. One of the things I say for people in that situation is like, just go through at the very beginning, just talk to your person about what they do on a day to day. Like, what's a really great day for them, and just document like all the things that they would say make a really great day. Then you can start asking them why, like, why do you do that? It will not only help you in understanding what quality of life means to them, but it will also help you care for them in the future. So if they say that they like to drink coffee and drink and have a scalding hot shower, you know that. I think we forget about these things like that. I hate being cold, like stuff like that. So in the earlier stages, you can have conversations like that. The Conversation Project is a pretty decent resource I recommend for people, conversationproject.org. I think where it gets a little bit more challenging is when the person living with dementia can talk to you, but they may not understand why you're asking these things, and they may not be able to actually like have these hypothetical conversation or thought processes. And cognitively, it might be harder for them to talk to you about what living well means to them. And so in these situations, I recommend thinking about like what you think they would say if you ask these questions. And I also recommend getting very educated about the end stages of disease. And I hate talking about the end stage, but it is important to know, like, is it important for them that they're able to walk? Is it important for them that they're able to feed themselves? What about if someone's having to bathe them and they can't communicate what they're feeling? Like stuff like that, like how their body is being cared for, privacy, independence. There's so many things that you can talk about, but what living well means to that person needs to be defined, whether or not they're able to actually tell us themselves. Because if you're making medical decisions for a person living with dementia, all medical decisions really go back to like what's happening right now. How has this person been living? What would they say about it? And then how are the options going to impact the way that they live on a day to day? Because then we choose the one that we think is going to be best for them in that moment, what we think that they would choose. So I hope that is somewhat helpful.
Well, yes, because I've seen you write and say that the one thing that the family caregivers have to communicate with the medical provider is the goal of care. You
Yeah.
don't have a goal of care when you just have authority to make decisions. You get
Mhm.
the goal of care by doing what you were just talking about, which is
Yeah.
really giving some thought to what brings this person joy. And if they can't do those things, does you use this phrase tipping points, which I've now
Yeah.
incorporated into how I work with clients, and I think it's great. You picture a seesaw, and it's like, well, treatment might be up in the air as the goal. We're still fixing, we're still doing these things. But when
Mhm.
the person loses what brings them joy, what's the point? And then the treatment
Mhm.
comes down and the care goes up where we're tending to more to comfort and pain management maybe, but we're not trying to fix it as much. So I really that comes to put it differently, that's the goal of care. And that's what you need to be prepared
Yeah.
to communicate with a physician.
Yeah. If you want, I can like touch on that. I could try to touch on that really quickly.
Sure.
So when I talk about goals of care, like like you said, it's the one thing that you want to be able to say to a medical professional, like, because it helps us know which path to go down. And it also, when you say, like, this is what our person's goal of care is, we listen to you because we're like, oh, this person's informed. Like, they know what they're doing.
Yes.
So it helps us. And it also opens the door for actual direct, real conversations where you're going to get like not beat around the bush answers because we know that you're willing to talk to us about this stuff. And so medical professionals know this term. We use it all the time, but we don't talk to people about it. And we're not good at like having the conversation about how to choose a goal of care necessarily, especially not when we're time pressed. So, but basically, goals of care, the way I teach it, is there are three goals. It's we're trying to prolong life is the first goal, and we're okay with prolonging life and accepting a worse quality of life. Like we have to accept the fact that the person may live from whatever's going on, and they may live with worse quality of life. The middle goal of care is like we're really focusing on how the different care options would impact their quality of life, and we're making quality of life based decisions, like that seesaw thing you were saying. And then the third goal of care is that this person would say they value quality of life and they would not find their quality of life really acceptable to them or not good enough to them. And they would want us to focus their care on comfort. So it's prolonging life, it's decisions based on quality of life versus comfort focused care. And the way that you make that decision is by determining what quality of life means to them. Do they value it? And what does it actually mean, like specifically? And that's that work that you have to do either with them or on their behalf. You have to do it because you can't set a goal of care without it. Yeah, and then the tipping points is like, that's what you can use when you do this quality of life deep dive. You can then in the future go, wait a minute, like we did this deep dive on quality of life. This is what they said. Well, they're now living like this. Do we need to change our goal of care? And then that means when you tell the medical professionals, they're going to offer you different treatment options. So
I
that's
love
why.
that you mentioned goal of care as almost magic words that will trigger a center in the brain of the treatment provider and really clue them in that you must be a listener of Dementia Empowered, or you must have taken the course at blammd.com. And I hope that people will go to your website because I have found it very enlightening and I talk about these things with people all the time. But just breaking what you just broke down rather quickly, you go into a lot of detail and people can go through a course and they can
Yeah.
really have the discipline to think about their loved one, their family member, their person living with dementia, and give it the thought that it really requires.
Yeah. Yes. I want people to be informed and empowered to feel better when they're doing this, feel less stressed out. And people living with dementia deserve thoughtful, individualized decisions. And we all do, but people living with dementia are incredibly vulnerable and their decision makers just need a lot more help in these medical situations.
I agree. And I thank you for the work you're doing at blammd.com and, of course, in the emergency room itself, because
Thanks.
this is what empowering people looks like. It's giving them the language to use, a structure through which they can come up with a goal of care. And then it results in exactly what you just said: less stress, more confidence. And I'll tell you, the people I talk to years after they've had to make these decisions and they're now doing their own planning, hoping their kids will get it right, they're carrying around a lot of regrets, or at least they're second
Mm,
guessing themselves. They don't know if they got it right for mom or dad. And
yeah.
that's what, so you don't want to be carrying that around. And I think by going to blammd.com and at least signing up for the emails and seeing what goes into this, you'll hear a whole lot more from Dr. Brittney Lamb about empowering yourself to make these important medical decisions. But Brittany, thank you so much for sharing your insights
Yeah.
and everything you're building out on the website. I think it's really going to do a lot of good for dementia caregivers.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you. Thanks for your work too.
I cover a lot of topics on Dementia Empowered: legal concepts, navigating the healthcare system, financial challenges. These concepts are all connected in dementia care. Coming soon to my website, KeystoneElderLaw.com, is a self-guided course to help you put it all together in one place. Anytime and anywhere, I can guide you through a number of sessions to learn the care skills of dementia. If your family would benefit from coaching, send me an email at info@KeystoneElderLaw.com.